We've got a bit of an unusual kind of approach today. Just looking at two chapters from the book around the blue Laminex table, and the first chapter, Pompey Elliot's War, I've chosen because it's got a bit of a military quality to it, and I thought the audience might like that. So
Well, yeah.
funny about that. And the second one is a bit different. It has no military connection, but it's a good story, I think. Anyway, so I'll just get it started. Like I said, chapter 14. There are 22 chapters in the book, so there's a lot of variety there. Different kinds of narratives there that I think would appeal to a good range of people. But enough of the introduction. Dad had a continuous association with the area surrounding Coolgardie, in that both of us would visit two wizened old souls who had a shack some distance from the CBD. When I say CBD, that's probably exaggerating a bit, but the Coolgardie town site. Fred and Merle Alford lived frugally on the outskirts of the town. Fred had the four front teeth missing from his smile, but it did not deter him from grinning frequently. I suspect he was grateful for, as he put it, living in God's own country. Their shack, a bit of humour there, but anyway, the shack had all of the basics: a Coolgardie safe, a wide fireplace to sit close to in winter.
Coolgardie safe being like a fridge.
A fridge, basically.
Yeah.
It was kind of very elementary, but a fridge, we'll say that.
Okay. Yeah.
A double bed with cyclone wire as a mattress, a water tank that collected the rain from the ceiling, and a couple of seats made out of mulga and tin. They didn't want for anything. They were prospectors trying to eke out a modest life. Fred would talk or ramble on about the mines, as difficult as that was with four front teeth missing, such as the Londonderry and the Wealth of Nations. These two enormously rich mines attracted English investors' capital in Coolgardie's early history, but they seemed to peter out until there was only a rivulet of gold trickling into their coffers. Many investors had their fingers burned. Fred believed that the lode they were looking for was just below the surface, close to their tin shack. I mean, I suspect a lot of people of the goldfields believe that. There was gold beneath there.
I could feel it.
Yes, I can feel it. Yes, it's there. They had a cat called Tiddles. It was afforded an impressive grave with wrought iron, stainless steel bedsteads as a protective fence, some hubcaps, and a sizable slab of marble detailing the details of his death. Tiddles was poisoned. Unfortunately, there was no one to send off Merle and Fred when they passed on. I can't recall exactly when that happened, but it must have been when I was in Perth. But they certainly, their grave sites are kind of nowhere to be seen. We only know that Fred was interred in an unmarked grave. Fred and Merle Alford sometimes wandered into my memory during unguarded moments. The spectacular flash-in-the-pan quality of Coolgardie's goldfields intrigued me. Maybe there were tons of gold still waiting to be discovered. The Golden Eagle was discovered there after all. As it turned out, it had another equally impressive claim to fame. Coolgardie was instrumental in shaping the contour of history in 1918, in the dying stages of World War I. The tide of the war was in the balance. In early 1918, following the capitulation of the Russian Empire, the end of fighting on the Eastern Front allowed the Germans to transfer a significant number of troops and equipment to the Western Front. And we all know the Western Front started in Belgium and finished in Switzerland. It was almost a kind of a continuous line, and the war shifted backwards and forwards along the Western Front. Sometimes the Allies were pushed a mile that way, and sometimes the Germans were pushed a mile that way. But fundamentally, it was kind of a pretty static line. On April the 24th, one day before Anzac Day, 1918, the German army succeeded in capturing the town of Villers-Bretonneux from the British 8th Division. The Germans had used tanks and large numbers of British troops had been captured. They threatened the great rail hub of Amiens. If Amiens could be taken, the Germans could push towards the French coast, thereby splitting the British and French armies. The Allied objective of ending the war would have been lost. Germany could have won the First World War. I mean, that might sound preposterous, considering the fact we know that Germany lost World War One. But such a tricky balance, that kind of that period towards the end of 1918, and I'll explain what's meant by that. The Germans were poised in a position not unlike the one described in Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar. Brutus observed, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Hold Villers-Bretonneux, take Amiens, and they would be the victors in World War One." Bold plans were afoot to recapture Villers-Bretonneux. The architect of those plans was Australian Brigadier General Harold Edward Elliott. He acquired the nickname Pompey after the famous football player Fred Pompey Elliott, who played 209 games for Carlton and Melbourne. The soldier Pompey was brilliant, tempestuous, and the bravest of the brave. He was renowned for never sending anyone anywhere he was not prepared to go himself. I mean, that's the mark of a great leader, that you don't require your troops to kind of put in extra. You know, good leaders are there with their men, and the men repay them with loyalty.
You're talking about the Roman Pompey.
Well, yeah, Pompey was one of the triumvirate. You know,
Yes,
yeah,
we're talking about that. Yeah, cool.
yeah. The three. There was there was Caesar, Augustus, Caesar, and Pompey, and they were in initial stages opposed to the Egyptian forces led by Cleopatra, and then there was a split. They got rid of Pompey because basically he was kind of pretty close to useless.
Politically useless from memory.
Mark Antony was very interested in Cleopatra. In fact, it's a great, the play Antony and Cleopatra by Shakespeare is a fabulous romance. You know, it's probably even more of a romantic story than, you know, Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, I'm not sure what the connection is with this Pompey, Fred Pompey Elliott.
Yeah, okay. So there might be a loose connection.
Yeah, there might be.
But it's more of a football connection then.
Yeah, that's right. It is a football. He was he was a good footballer, and somehow the troops thought, "Oh, we'll call him Pompey Elliott." Yeah. So as a result, no Australian general was more revered, even worshipped, by the troops who served under him. General Ferdinand Foch, the supreme commander of all Allied forces. You have to be very careful with that one again. That particular one, Mr. Foch. I don't think he was. No, he wasn't. No, I was thinking the Fokker Wolf. But that was German. And here we've got the French supreme commander of Allied forces. So he basically said that he demanded that Villers-Bretonneux be retaken. It was so important, this town of Villers-Bretonneux. Elliott's plan involved a night attack on April the 24th, 1918, the day before Anzac Day. The belief amongst the Allied commanders was that success was unlikely and that the audacious night attack was very risky and doomed to failure. They didn't think it would succeed. Basically, to summarise, it was, in the parlance we sometimes use as a result of World War II, a bridge too far. An ambitious, grand plan, but success very, very unlikely. That was the consensus amongst the Allied high command. But things were that desperate, they thought, or Foch thought, let's do it anyway. So
let's do it.
Let's let's attack rather than kind of get involved in other amorous stuff. Yeah. So 2 Australian brigades, the 13th led by Brigadier Glasgow and the 15th commanded by Elliot, would spearhead the attack because he's the man who masterminded. Why not? He'd be the person to pursue it. The ferocity of the Australian attack was especially effective, and by the morning of April 25th, Villers-Bretonneux had been retaken. One British high-ranking officer, Neville Linton, said the attack was one of the finest manoeuvres of the war. Foch talked of the altogether astonishing valiance, bravery of the Australian brigades. It arrested the progress of the German juggernaut in late April 1918. The defeat of Germany in the months after Villers-Bretonneux showed that the Australians were influencing the destiny of the world as never before. Pompey Elliot's plan seized the offensive for the Allies, and the tide referred to by Brutus turned against the Germans. World War I ended on November the 11th, 1918. Chapter 1 of Pompey's story began 41 years previously. Pompey Elliot's parents were part of the wave of immigrants from England who saw greater opportunities in the goldfields of Victoria, Australia. Thomas and Helen Elliot were married on December the 24th, 1867. She was 18 and he 38 years old. They began married life at Cockatoo, and after a short time later, he and 4 other hopefuls registered the Sir George Stephenson Gold Company. Unusual name because George Stephenson was instrumental in designing and building one of the first trains. So I don't know where that came from. Maybe they thought, we'll be pioneers and we'll somehow make something good of this this gold deposit. It failed. The exact opposite. Thomas then tried farming. Land was freely available, so they chose a block at Charlton, some 240 kilometres northwest of Melbourne. In their first season, bushfires destroyed their crops, and in the second, a wet winter curtailed their profits. They asked the Victorian government for a time extension to pay the fees and rates on their land. In the middle of these tribulations, Helen became pregnant with their 4th child, Harold Edward Elliot, Pompey Elliot. So things were, as they say in the vernacular of Australia, things were crook in Tullarook. Anyway, they asked the Victorian government to upgrade their land to a lease. It was granted. They asked for further extension to pay the rent on the lease as well. There was a constant battle with snakes, kangaroos, rabbits, bushfires, and little or too much water. After Harold's birth, 3 more children entered the Elliot brood. Thomas became increasingly dissatisfied. He wandered, came back, and Helen became pregnant again. Yeah, it must have been not much to do after dark.
No
TV, kept producing more and more children. Yeah, that made 8 children with little money coming in to service the farm's requirements and the demands of a young family. Unsurprisingly, in 1890, Thomas began to feel thoroughly disenchanted with farming. He had little to show after 20 years of hard labour. Victoria's wheat industry was in crisis. Bank crashes and the Depression of 1893 made things worse. In the midst of all this gloom, in the eastern states, there were gold discoveries in Western Australia, in the Pilbara, Murchison, Yilgarn and Southern Cross. The El Dorado of all of these finds was at Coolgardie. On September the 17th, 1892, Bailey and Ford dug up 554 ounces of gold. If we calculate the amount in current values, the find was worth $1,022,130. It was better than a lotto win. They later dug up a further 200 ounces, another $369,000. You can imagine Thomas Elliott's reaction. In July 1893, he set out for Western Australia on his own. At the age of 60, he arrived at Dundas Hills. And you can imagine that a 60-year-old man kind of chancing everything that he has to find this gold strike. Once the gold lust gets in the veins, it's very difficult for men to resist it. And Thomas Elliot was no exception there. So he set out for Dundas Hills, 160 kilometres south of Coolgardie. A few other prospectors joined him, but they ran out of water before they found gold. He was convinced that the land was highly prospective, but guilt at abandoning his wife and 8 children pushed him back to Charlton. So he gave up. I've got a chance here, but my wife and children need me back in.
Yeah, I was going to say, was it permission granted to leave? No. He just went.
He just went. He just went. You can see this erratic behaviour. Attracted to gold, guilt, and then So this toing and froing of attitudes.
Yeah.
In early 1894, itchy feet and gold fever beckoned him back to Coolgardie, that very thing we're talking about. He couldn't help himself.
Yeah.
His wife was not impressed. She said, "If you go back, you'll only be taking your bones over to leave them." Nice, positive kind of comment on his chances of prospects, his prospects there. A totally rational man would have agreed with her, but men who are afflicted with gold lust tend to eschew common sense. He arrived back in Dundas Hills, and to his dismay, someone had taken over his lease and floated it on the English financial market for £60,000, a considerable amount of money back in those days. It was another bitter result. A lesser man might have gone straight back to Charlton with his tail between his legs. Not Thomas Elliot. He was forever hopeful. He decided to end his association with Dundas Hills. He headed for a location close to Coolgardie called Widgymultha. Once again, the area he was focused on had been developed and sold to another syndicate for £800. It seemed he was doomed to fail in all of his ventures. As well, he had news of some disconcerting developments in Charlton. His wife, Helen, was dealing with a terrible drought and debt was looming. Bankruptcy appeared to be the only choice for them. She had an absent husband with no prospects of assuaging the debtors. She wrote to the Lands Department and said, "I cannot pay any more at present, but I hope to be able to further reduce my arrears before the end of the year." It was a forlorn hope. They wrote back informing her that if the arrears were not substantially reduced by mid-June, proceedings would be expedited and the lease forfeited. It was tantamount to declaring them bankrupt. The situation seemed to be irretrievable. It is darkest before the dawn. In the dark sky over Coolgardie, a lightning bolt lit up the gloom. The West Australian newspaper declared 6 tired, disheartened diggers strike it rich. It continued, it was the most wonderful find of gold made in the colony, and news of the marvellously rich deposit described in the article gradually reached Victoria and Charlton. The local newspaper, the Donald Times, eventually reported that one of the 6 miners was a farmer and a dairyman of Charlton, whose farm was located closer to the Avoca River. The Londonderry mine was eventually sold to a syndicate for £700,000, and £180,000 was distributed to the 6 miners who discovered her. £30,000 was Thomas Elliott's share of the windfall. Considering that the average wage in 1895 was £650, he received 46 times the average wage. Furthermore, if we equate it to 2020 salaries, where the average annual wage is $90,000, his share of the mine sale was $4.1 million. It was a tidy profit, to put it mildly.
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad, not bad after all the terrible things he'd gone through, you know. I mean, persistence. Just the average person would have said, "No, too hard. I'm going home.
Yeah.
I'm going home. And I'm going home to tough times, but it's better than this."
Yeah.
But didn't work out that way. So Thomas Elliot, in the money, moved to Ballarat, paid off the arrears of the Charlton farm, bought Elsinore, a majestic residence on Lake Windermere, for £2,500. Harold, who had shown promise as a student, was enrolled at Ballarat College, a private all-male school that provided a first-class education, and eventually entered Melbourne University. It was at university that he was introduced to military life when he joined the University Officers Corps. Later, it emerged that the Londonderry mine was a dud. The gold deposit was narrow and on the surface. The money was in Thomas Elliot's bank account before this happened. So what is the connection between Coolgardie and the Great Battle of Villers-Bretonneux? Pompey Elliot grew up in an isolated rural community of Charlton with limited opportunities for advancement. Without the El Dorado strike at Londonderry, Thomas would have limped back to Charlton, declared his bankruptcy, and Pompey Elliot's horizons would have been stunted, if not suffocated, because of it. His life would have been impoverished by the blight of poverty and the lack of opportunity. He might have become a solid, middle-class citizen of the community and died without experiencing the adulation his troops showered upon him. Nor would he have the chance to devise the brilliant plan to retake Villers-Bretonneux. The massive windfall of Londonderry for the Elliot family had a greater dividend for the world community. It halted an advance at Villers-Bretonneux that could have led to a German victory in World War I. It changed the course of World War I. The Londonderry strike at Coolgardie had made a contribution to world history. Fred and Merle Alford were sitting on rich ground, but they were more concerned with setting up a final resting home for Tiddles than the tide of history. So there we go.
That's great.
The story of Fred and Merle. I remember him so well. Fred, he was a really thin character and whiskey beard. He never used to shave, and he kind of you think he couldn't even hold up a pick, you know. But but there he was. He was battling through, and Merle was. Look, she was no beauty queen. I can tell you that. But she,
well suited to each other.
They were. Look, I mean, you know, they chose each other, and they were happy in their little part of Coolgardie. It was I can't recall exactly how far out of Coolgardie it was, but it was probably 5-10 kilometres out. You know, this old shack, and he'd go out and looking for gold, and I don't think he was very successful. But I remember we used to go there often. But, you know, he was always a happy-go-lucky bloke, you know. He didn't have much, but a big smile, and like I said, the kind of 4 teeth at the front were missing, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter because he loved smiling, and but I always remember him as being, you know, one of those one-offs. It's a complete character that the goldfields seems to yield up often. So yeah,
one of them.
One-offs. So you know, and you wouldn't find them in the city.
No,
you wouldn't find them in the city. They're a rare breed.
Yeah.